Today is the 8th of July, 1996. We're here at the home of Ken and Gwen Goates, and we have a visitor, Glen Seely.
Yes.
And they're going to tell us about their sister, Joyce, who was a bit older than Gwen and 1 year older than Glen. And they'll start now.
Thank you. Well, Joylyn, this is especially for you. In answer to your letter, I was thrilled to receive your letter. It's been a long time since we've visited with you or seen you. In fact, I think the last time I can recall is when Larry had one of his children blessed, and we were there for the blessing. As Ken mentioned, my memory of your mom isn't really very good because she was almost 7 years older than I am, and by the time I came, her childhood was just about through, and by the time I got into school, she was out of school, and she went on to BYU and to working and married your dad, and so I didn't really have an awful lot to remember, but I figured Glen would because he was
I'm older.
he was closest. There's just a year between Glen and your mom. I think my best recollection of your mom was that she was the boss. And I think Glen agrees with that. When the last 3 children were born, your mom being the oldest, and my mom, she was in her almost 40 when Karen was born, and in her 40s when the other 2 were born, and she didn't feel so well, and I'm sure this is one reason why Joyce got to be boss. But it continued the rest of her life. She was still the boss, and we always did what Joyce said. And you remember more about being the boss? Or?
Well, okay. Yes, I thought maybe I should be the boss, but no, Joyce was older, and whenever Grandma and Grandpa left, Joyce was in charge, and I don't know. Very seldom was I the boss.
I was never the boss.
But let's back up here. Some of my earliest recollections of your mother were, of course, given to me stories I'd heard by Grandma and Grandpa, and they always told me that Joyce was the easiest child to raise. She never got in any mischief, did any problem, except for one thing, and that's when she had black hair, very coal black hair. And when she was little, she got out the can of lard and decided that ought to be for hair oil or something. And she got the lard and plastered down her hair. And Grandma came home and found her in the lard bucket and her hair all plastered down. And that's about the only thing that she did that she wasn't supposed to do. I remember one of my earliest memories is crawling up on a chair and looking into a basket that had a multicolored blanket. And Joyce was on one side and I was on the other. We looked in the basket and they said, "This is for baby Lee." And that's probably my earliest recollection is crawling up on that chair, seeing this multicolored blanket. Well, after Lee just learned how to walk, I remember we lived at Aunt Liza's house. And Lee was missing. And Mother came and said, well, we just didn't know where to look for him. And we all ran out in the yard, couldn't find him, came back in. Well, it'd be Joyce and I.
We weren't around.
And Mother said, well, let's pray. And she had us kneel down and say a prayer that we could find Lee. And we got up, walked outside, and Joyce said, "There he is." And she went down and looked through a fence where he'd crawled through it. So we went over and got him and brought him home. Let's see.
Well, I'm saying one thing that I remember Dad telling me, that your mother was very shy, and that she wouldn't go play with her friends or go over to other people's homes. And so in order to get her to go and play, he'd give her a dime if she would go go play with some of her friends. Or so I guess they never did give us an allowance. We didn't know about allowances in those days, so a dime was really quite a lot of money. So he'd give her a dime to go play.
So did she take it or not?
I guess so. I don't know.
Well, let me jump ahead a little ways, because I remember when your mother was learning to drive a car, and I was trying to learn too about the same time. And of course, I thought I could drive better than she did. But she was driving, and she made a couple of mistakes that I thought, at least. So I reached up and turned the key off on the car we were driving. She had to pull off the road and come to a stop. And as she stopped, she came across with a welt that gave me a what for that I still remember.
Gave you her best haymaker.
Serves you right.
So well, she did drive, and she did a good job. She's a good driver.
Yeah. I know one of my fondest memories was when I was playing with my friends, and she would come out and play with us. And she didn't do it very often, but once in a while she would come and play with us, and I just thought that was wonderful. I can remember that was so great that she would come and play with us.
Well, she went to Lincoln School, grade school, and then Box Elder Junior High School, and Box Elder High School. And in high school, she dated your dad. Now, your dad was in my class. Joyce was 1 year ahead of me. And I recall when they'd sit together in assemblies and programs, and I resented a little bit here that how come she goes with somebody my age? She ought to be going with somebody older. And I had a little bit of a resentment. Your dad also sold newspapers down at Bushnell General Hospital. And he was the toughest competition that we had down here from all the other. He would work harder and longer to sell. And he was selling the Ogden Standard Examiner, which was not that popular among the soldiers. I had the Salt Lake Telegram, and it was more, and also then I had the Deseret News, and the Telegram was the most popular. It was the easiest to sell, but we made more money selling the Deseret News, like half a cent more per paper. So we'd push selling the Deseret News first, then come through with the Telegram. But Lynn would always come through, and he'd keep working until the wars. He was the last one there usually. We'd all be going home here, and he'd still be out working. Now, let me tell you, in later years, I certainly changed my opinion here about whether or not Lynn was to be the right one for Joyce. And I'd like to tell you, there's not a finer man alive than your dad. I respect him and think an awful lot of him. And your mother. We think I couldn't have had a better sister. Well, bar present company.
Well,
but Joyce was a wonderful sister, and she took care of all of us.
Yes, she did.
She was the boss, and she was a better cook than Grandma.
Well, enough said.
And
speaking of her elementary at Lincoln Elementary, back in those days they didn't have much shrubbery around the schools, or I was thinking of curb and gutters and that, but I remember the folks telling me that your mom was sitting on the sidewalk in front of the school playing jacks, and a car rolled over the sidewalk and ran over your mother. And I don't remember her being, what extent her injuries were, but I do remember that she was run over by a car when she was in elementary school.
And it made you think what?
Well, she had this loss of pigment in her skin, and in my mind at that time, when you have a lot of scabs and they heal, there's always your skin is always lighter underneath the scabs, and I always thought that that's what had caused the loss of pigment in her skin. But of course I knew that now that was not true, but that was what I connected in my mind as a child.
I always remember that your mother always needed a drink of water before she went to bed. Always. In fact, any occasion, she needed a drink of water. But we later found out that she had one kidney that didn't grow, and that she did need more water, and that was a good thing for her. But always growing up here, remember, Gwen, you tell her about she liked water and...
She made a recording, these were the records. You wouldn't have tapes and videos in those days, and I don't know if she made it in school or just where she did, but she was to tell about herself. And in this, she did tell that she liked to drink water and she loved to chew gum, and the record stuck right as she said that, and so when she would play it would always say, chew gum, chew gum, chew gum, chew gum.
That's right.
And we all laughed about that, because, she did love to chew gum, chew gum, chew gum. I remember another time, she was a teenager, I guess, and older. Anyway, we had this old wind-up Victrola that I guess would be worth a lot of money today, except your dad burned it.
Burned it, that's right, he did. Threw it away.
But she wanted a nice, they're not stereos, what were they called? Record player, anyway. She wanted something to play the latest tunes on, the records, and she said, for this one Christmas, if we didn't have one, don't bother to wake me up, because that's all I want to have for Christmas. So Grandpa bought one, but he didn't have it delivered because he didn't want her to know it was there. He didn't want her to have it. So Christmas Eve, I can remember them sneaking it in the house and keeping it away from her so that she didn't get to see it till the next morning. There was the record player.
Hi-fi.
No, it was before hi-fis too. I don't know what they called them back there. It was just after Victrolas.
Record player.
But it was an automatic, so that you could stack more than one record on top and it would fall down. But it was still the big 78, what they call them, records, big ones.
RPM.
That was before 45s and 33 and the thirds.
Yeah.
But she did get her record player, I know that.
Well, I remember earlier Christmases that we lived at Nellie Yours on 3rd West, and that's in 4th, 5th North. And we had an attic. Now, this house, I remember my dad rented the house. Oh, wait a minute. One other thing your mother did that was mischievous. We rented the house, and as I recall, he said it was going to be $12 a month to rent the house.
Wow.
And Dad said that he wasn't sure he could pay that.
Well, he made $2 a week at copying the records at the courthouse.
Well,
This
maybe
was
it was
during the Depression.
Well, maybe it was $8 a month that he paid for the rent. At any rate,
Really?
it was an amount that he didn't think he could, and he said, Nellie Orr, the landlady, was sure that he couldn't. But she rented it to him anyway, and it was a little house, and it had an attic over the garage. And at Christmas time, I remember a lot of our toys had disappeared, the trikes and the scooters and so on. And Dad would take those and repaint them, and then put them up in the attic so we wouldn't see them, and get them back down for Christmas. It would be under the tree, and there was a nice newly painted scooter and tricycle. Okay, well, but out in front of this house, and he moved in, that Nellie Orr had some trees that she had planted. And he came home one day, and Aunt Joyce, there's your mother, had been out and stripped the bark off the tree. And Nellie Orr came to see about the tree. And ended up, Dad had to pay for a tree.
Oh dear.
And but the tree never did die. It survived all this harsh treatment. And,
so did he have to pay for a tree
yeah,
that didn't die?
he paid for it, and it didn't die. So it was still there.
Mm-hmm.
And that was on 3rd West. Then we moved up to.
We
again on 3rd
lived
West.
at 3rd West.
We moved straight up the street at about 26 North 3rd
yeah,
West.
by the park.
Next to Ashcroft's.
Mm-hmm.
And Audrey Ann Ashcroft was friends with Joyce. They're about the same age. And Dewey Ashcroft used to take me fishing out to the slough. And also he'd take Joyce and Audrey Ann to the movies. That was 10 cents.
Yeah.
Now we had to go out and gather bottles, pop
Bottle
bottles,
caps,
beer
yeah.
bottles, and so on. If you got, you had to have 10 cents to go to the movie.
Yeah.
And we had to work and get the scrap iron we'd take up to Bloom's to sell for tickets. And I was a little jealous because Joyce got to go with Ashcroft. And I thought he was a millionaire.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Very wealthy guy because he could take me fishing and do this. And
Yeah.
do you remember what he did for a living?
Wasn't he a service station?
Service station
Yeah.
attendant. He didn't own the station. He
No.
just worked there.
But no, my birthday. I was born on her birthday. Both of us,
Oh, on Audrey Ann's?
on Mrs. Ashcroft's
Oh, okay.
birthday. And we're both. And I was born in the house there.
Yeah.
And I remember I loved going over into their yard because they had a fish pond in the back, and that was really fun. The goldfish, to watch that, and she used to invite me over to. She'd make waffles, and they just had the 3 of them, and they didn't always use up the batter, and so she'd invite me over to eat the rest of her waffles because Mother never made waffles. It was fun. I enjoyed the Ashcrofts. That was some fond memories there.
Well, that was on 3rd West, and then we moved to 7th South.
Mm-hmm.
Dad had bought 2 houses down there near. He bought a fruit stand and then bought motel units. And he bought a building over at the Indian school and brought them across and said they could remodel the building during the war because you couldn't get permits for new building, but you could remodel and add and make additions. And that's go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, when we first went down to 7th South, that was about the time Joyce graduated from high school, and so then she went off to BYU, to college, and I don't know how long she was there, not too long, because she had been dating your dad, and she was more interested in him, and I don't know just exactly how all this came about. I do know she worked in Salt Lake for a while, and she lived at the Beehive House, and that was the Brigham Young's home in Salt Lake that they had made into more like a dormitory for young ladies to live. And I remember I went down and stayed with her one night there. And she had a room with, I think there were 4 girls in the one room. And then they had the bathroom, and that was in common, and I think they ate more like cafeteria style, you know, and they did have a, but I do remember staying with her there in Salt Lake at the Beehive House. And so she wasn't really home much when we were in the living on 7th South there. She didn't get in on all of the making the beds and cleaning the cabins. she had all of her jobs in raising us while we were
That's right.
Third West.
Well, then when Dad converted one building into a store, when he had a grocery store, and there was a house in the back, and the front end was a new addition here for a store. And Joyce and Lynn came back and rented the store and ran the store.
Mm-hmm. No, they lived in there was an apartment upstairs, and they lived up there too for a while.
Yeah, that's right. And then they moved up by the Central School.
Yeah, and that's Larry was born when they were up there. And I remember I went up and stayed for about a week after Larry was born to help her. She get back on her feet and whatnot.
Well, your dad ran the store well. He was a good businessman.
Yes, he was.
And ambitious and hardworking. Let's see.
Do you remember vacations that you took with Joyce?
Well, earlier we went to southern Utah, and down to Orange County, Orangeville, and to Rice and Zions Canyon. And there Joyce did part of the driving, and then we'd sort of take turns.
Mm-hmm.
That was a fun trip. I remember going to Bear Lake. We'd go over there.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, other vacations. Back when I can remember vacation, we'd go to Lagoon.
That's what I was going to
That
say.
was a big outing.
Every summer we went to Lagoon.
And we didn't have a car, so we went in the
truck. and we got to sit on the sides.
on the sides. They had
barrels wet.
That's right. They had sideboards where they'd carry cases of oil. And that's where they would put blankets and pillows up there, and the kids would all ride down both sides of the oil truck and go down to Lagoon.
That was a big deal.
That was a real highlight.
I remember sunburns at Bear Lake.
Oh, yeah. I
Big
used to get
sunburns.
sunburned on 3rd West. We lived close to the tennis court, and I'd go over and play tennis and come home and couldn't walk because it was so bad the sunburns. And I remember after it started to heal, Joyce had helped me. She'd pull the skin off my back, and it'd come from here and turn out of the back.
Whoa. Well, I have to tell one thing.
Okay,
Gwen
let's
won't
hit
like
the
you
can.
guys can take a rest, but
Okay.
there are only 7 minutes left, so we have to make this fast.
Oh, okay.
Hi. Anyway, when she was 6, she lived over here on Marcus Road, and she said, I know what these kids mean when they say they have a bad trip. Now, you probably have heard this story yourself, but this is the way she told me one day. She said, yeah, I know what they're going through when they have a bad trip. She had I guess almost a handful of pills she'd take every day, and sometimes they'd react to one with another. But she said, Lynn would be gone, and she would be sitting there half asleep, half awake, just caught, and she couldn't get in, and she couldn't get out of this situation, and she'd sit there in horror for a long time. And so she would finally come out of it, and she complained to her doctor, and he said, well, you've got to think of something sweet and nice and happy during that time. Force yourself to think of something nice. And so, well, okay. So she a few days or weeks later, she was in the same setting where she was half asleep, half awake, and in this dread horror. And she had recently seen Mary Poppins, and Mary Poppins goes, spit spot and everything gets cleaned up, and then she slides up the banister and down the banister, and everything's wonderful. Well, anyway, she said she noticed Mary Poppins sliding down the banister, but as she looked at the banister, she realized suddenly the banister had turned into a razor blade, and so it made it worse than ever. Anyway, that's what she told me.
Ooh.
Ooh, not good.
Well, that's not my favorite story. Anyway, I remember your dad telling us that, you know, our circumstances that your mom grew up in were, we didn't have a lot of money, and we had a lot of kids, but we had a lot of fun. And my mother was very, very conservative. She made things do. And I remember your dad saying that was one thing that he had to teach your mom after they got married, was how to spend money. She would not spend money, and he said he had to teach her how that money was for spending. It was that you could do a lot of things if you just spent the money.
If you got time for a quick story that your dad told grandmother when he was worked in Ogden, and somehow somebody went out behind the store and he was drunk and he got rolled back there, and grandmother says, "Oh, does that help?"
Yeah, that's a famous story. Yeah, that's a whole nother tape, is your
Oh,
grandma.
okay. Well, getting a single from Ken, you tell another story.
I can't think of anything. What have we got? Now, I've got some pictures that I've taken through the years that we're going to scan off on the computer and send to you. And what I noticed was her hairdos. She had the famous beehive hairdo that she wore a lot. And also, I have one letter that I saved. I came across it about a year ago that she had written to me, and I'm going to have him scan that and send it to you, so give you an idea of how she was, and her handwriting and her personality, I think is.
She even talks about Joy
She
Lynn.
even talks about Joy Lynn.
Well, you had a wonderful mother. She's a sweet sister, and credit to you.
Still got 3 minutes. Let's see. Little soft shoe.
Yeah, I think she showed a lot of courage the years that she was sick. Of course, you may be more familiar with that because you were there when she was sick, and it was not easy for her. She really.
Nor for your dad, because your dad was told that it didn't look good, and he was really concerned about her. And, probably more concerned than she was for her health.
I know he came to each one of us to see if we would be tested, to see if we could donate a kidney, and he felt that was really hard to ask, you know, for us. But he wanted to try everything he could to save her life, and I know we all got tested, and for some reason none of our blood was a good enough match for her, so that they said that it wouldn't work.
Well, we'll have to think and go see what other pictures we can come up with to help Joanne to remember.
Hold this up.
Oh,
Okay.
You don't like that one.
There's a good one.
yeah.
Let me zoom in on that, Homer.
Don't know if you can see this, but weight has always been a problem with us, and I don't remember your mother being heavy ever.
I don't think so.
But in this letter that I have, she talks about going to the doctor to lose weight. So I guess she thought she had a weight problem too. But here we are, Finally thin.
Thin at last.
Thin at last.
All right. I'll bet we're done.
Okay, well, now let's see what we got.